When we see the majesty of the Grand Canyon, it begs the question of how it was made. Is there a God that created it? If so, then which God? Now these are the questions that need to be answered. So join us today as we build the case for Christianity. Hi, I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to the Grand Canyon. You know, when we look at a site like this, we begin to ask ourselves some questions. Is there a God that exists? If so, can we know him in a personal way? Is there evidence to believe in God, or do we just have to take it by blind faith? And why the Christian God? Why not some other God? Why give evidence for Jesus Christ? Well, that's what we're all about today as we look at the case for Christianity. But here's why we need to do it. Let me tell you a story. A number of years ago in Southern California, I was coming out of a market, a bag of groceries under my hand, and a Hare Krishna lady came up to me. She said, "Excuse me, sir, would you like to know what life's all about?" And I said, "Actually, I do know what life's all about, but tell me what you think." She said, "Krishna consciousness. That's the answer." I said, "How do you know it's true?" She said, "Ever since I've been into it, my life's been changed. It must be true." Well, I said, "Is there any other reason you can give me, besides your own testimony, why I ought to believe in that?" And she said, basically, "No, you just have to take my word for it." After saying goodbye to her, I ran into a Muslim fellow not 10 feet away. And you know what? He said the same thing. Same exact story, but a totally different belief system. Later that same day, I ran into a Mormon individual, and he said the exact same thing. Ever since he's been into it, his life's been changed, but nothing else besides the changed life. Now, as a Christian, I have a changed life also, but I got one other thing that no other religious group, no other philosophy has, and that is evidence to back it up. Jesus Christ gives us evidence to believe in him. You want to hear about it? Well then, follow me today as we go around the Grand Canyon and we'll look at the case for Christianity. The New Testament was written some 1,900 years ago by 8 separate authors. We don't have any of the original documents, but we depend on copies of copies to reconstruct the text. Well, can we trust what the New Testament says, or has it been changed as it's been copied and recopied throughout history? Let's examine the question of the reliability of the New Testament. As we begin to establish the case for Christianity, the first point we have to show is that the New Testament is a reliable document. What does that mean? That means it has to say the same thing as when originally written, and what it says has to match up with known reality. Now, I have here a very ancient copy of an English translation of the Bible and a more ancient copy of a Greek New Testament. How do we know what we read today is what was originally written? How do we know it hadn't been changed, altered throughout history? Can we be confident that the Bible we read today is the same Bible that was originally written? Well, the answer is an unqualified yes. And I can give one simple illustration to make this point very clear. In the 17th century, William Shakespeare wrote 37 plays, all after the invention of the printing press. In every single one of Shakespeare's 37 plays, there are gaps in the printed copy where we don't know what Will originally said. For example, Romeo says to Juliet, "We don't know, there's nothing there. For all we know, we might have said, 'My, what big eyes you have.'" So what do scholars have to do? At that particular point, they make what is known as a conjectural emendation, which is a fancy term for a good guess. They have to fill in the blank. In every single one of Shakespeare's 37 plays, we have to fill in the blank because we do not know what was originally written. Now let's compare Shakespeare to the New Testament. The New Testament, written some 16 centuries before the works of Shakespeare, 3/4 of its history copied by hand. How many times do we have to make an educated guess to fill in the blank so we know what was originally written? You know what the answer is? 0. Not once. because of the abundance of the evidence that's there. We have today a New Testament that has been accurately transcribed. In other words, it says the same thing as when originally written. Now, this by itself doesn't make it the Word of God. In fact, doesn't even make it true, because you can accurately transcribe the ravings of a lunatic. So we have to go to point B, and that is this. What the New Testament says, does it match up with known reality? Is it historically accurate? Well, the New Testament claims to record historical events. God became a human being in history according to the Gospel of John. John said the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Is the history accurate? The answer is, again, an unqualified yes. The New Testament mentions many places, people, events. They all match up, as far as we can tell, with known reality. There was a Pontius Pilate who was governor of Judea. There was a Tiberius Caesar ruling in Rome. There was a high priest named Annas, a high priest named Caiaphas. In fact, in 1990, we actually found the bones of Caiaphas in a burial plot in the city of Jerusalem. These were real flesh and blood people. Jesus came in real space, real time, and interacted with real people. The evidence matches the New Testament, and the New Testament matches the evidence. So what do we find? We find that we have a document that's not only been transmitted accurately, but all the references that are there, as far as we can tell, match up with known reality. Now, what does this mean? Well, there's something in law called the Ancient Documents Rule. And the Ancient Documents Rule basically goes like this. If a document is brought forward, shows no sign of tampering, no sign of being a forgery, and it matches up as best we can tell with known reality, then that document is accepted as true until evidence can be brought to the contrary. In other words, the document is given the benefit of the doubt. Well, let's apply it to the New Testament. The New Testament should be given the benefit of the doubt until evidence is brought to the contrary. Therefore, it's not the job of the Christian to prove the New Testament. It's the job of the skeptic to bring evidence that the New Testament is unreliable. Specific evidence. Well, there isn't any, because the New Testament is reliable. So in establishing the case for Christianity, here's our first point. We have a document, the New Testament, that has been accurately transmitted, says the same thing as when originally written, and what it says matches up with known reality. Therefore, it says, you can trust me, you can pay attention to the message. So that's going to bring us to our next point in the case for Christianity. What is the message of the New Testament? Who is the main character? What is it trying to tell us? Because of point number one, we can now look at this message and find out what it's trying to tell us and who the main character is and what we're supposed to believe about him.